Okay. Okay. All right. So we're talking about incontinence and continence, resoluteness or irresoluteness in Nicomachean Ethics. And we're thinking about this in the context of changing habits. How are we able to change habits? Who is able to change habits? And right, we were discussing the difficulty of changing habits when you want to stop smoking, when you want to start jogging, when you want to, name your bad habit that you want to break. And the incontinent person is the one who is knows what the right habit is, knows what they should do, but is unable to break their habit. Right? So you say, I'm going to jog tomorrow, and the next morning you wake up and you don't go jog. Right? You do whatever your original habit was. Those who are right, unable to do what they want to do. And so there's a couple interesting things about this, things that Aristotle mentions. And as I said in the last video, right, one of the things that's important about uh, this idea is that for Aristotle, there are people that know, but that knowledge doesn't compel them to actually do the right thing. Incontinent people have a kind of state of character, kind of innate character, Aristotle seems to think, that makes them sort of innately, inherently less able or unable to change their habits, makes them suffer from acrasia, like that weakness of will. And this seems to be, for Aristotle, something that can't be changed through habit, or in any case, if it can be changed, is much more difficult to change. It seems that Aristotle thinks the incontinent are simply unable to change their habits. They're the ones who, incontinence is not just my inability to do what I want to do one time. Right? Maybe I start jogging for a week, but after a week I fall off. Right? The habit just doesn't take. I'm not able to really change my habits. And Aristotle thinks this is kind of personality type, right? That there are just some people who are less capable of changing their habits than others. And so this gets into the possibility that in order to become good, you have to, in the first place, be good. You have to be a resolute kind of person that has this innate capacity to follow through on their judgments and on what they want. Actually, not just wants the right thing, but is able to then do the right thing. So, right, a little bit of a circle here, that in order to become good, you have to be good. But anyway, I think this is an interesting idea, and it points to something else, something about knowledge, the kind of knowledge that's involved in ethics, practical wisdom. So let's return. Sorry, we're kind of jumping around, but let's if continence and incontinence are central to book 7, book 6 gives us some insight into incontinence and why certain people and in certain cases people are unable to change their habits or take up better habits. So in book 6, Aristotle is sort of laying out what he understands by practical wisdom, and why he thinks practice, ethics is a question of practice and not theory, and some of the implications of that. And he does this by making a distinction between what he calls variables and invariables, or variable things and invariable things. Things that are necessary and things that are contingent. So there are two, not realms of being, but two kinds of being, two kinds of beings within being. There are variable things, things that change, things that come into and go out of being, things that can be altered, and things that cannot be altered. Things that are, as he says, eternal and unchanging. This connects also to, right, the fact that within ourselves there are also things that are invariable, the kind of general being we are, and the laws of nature that we're unable to change, everything that is beyond our control in that way, and then our variable and changeable habits, which we have control over. But Aristotle's thinking about the distinction between variable and invariable in terms of knowledge about the external world, or about the physical world. Some kinds of knowledge have to do with invariable things. The obvious examples of this are mathematics, right? Where when I know 2 + 2 = 4, that knowledge is never going to change, right? 2 + 2 = 4 is invariable. And when I know that permanently and certainly, right? The truth that 2 + 2 = 4 is invariable and thus eternal and necessary, right? It's necessary that 2 + 2 = 4. It can never be the case that 2 + 2 equals anything but 4. It's eternal, right? We can't imagine that such a thing, such a truth, would come into or go out of existence, that it would become true, meaning that previously it was untrue, or that it would stop being true, that it could ever in the future be not true. So that is what he means by eternal, what he means by necessary and invariable. Then there are all kinds of other things. Other examples of the invariable would include, he gives the example of things in the past. Right? What has happened in the past is invariable. You can't change what happened in the past. It's necessary. It is true in every case. It will always be true. It's eternal. Right? What happened now always has happened. So knowledge about history, about what happened in the past, knowledge about mathematics, knowledge about sciences, scientific principles, right? That, for example, wood floats in water, or that a stone falls when you drop it. These things are invariable. And he'll say, this kind of knowledge is very important for ethics, right? We need this kind of knowledge. And so we can kind of hear an echo of some form of the Platonic idea that knowledge is essential to ethics, to the good, to doing right. Knowledge is crucial, indispensable. It helps us evaluate the world, right? Practical wisdom calls for an evaluation of the particular situation. But I can't, in my evaluation of that situation, I need to have as much information as possible, and I want to be as sure as possible that that information is accurate and true, right? And so, in my sort of evaluation, I I need all this knowledge about invariables, right? Knowledge about um, physics is going to be essential. For example, if I need to do something physical, knowledge about, right, maybe how a fire burns would be useful information, knowledge that I could have theoretically, but which would be useful uh, in deciding whether or not to go into a burning building. Uh, so knowledge about invariable things, scientific, mathematical, historical knowledge, is extremely important and useful to ethics, uh, but it isn't the essence of ethical knowledge. Ethical knowledge is, as we've said over and over again, right, about particulars, about this particular situation. And this particular situation, although it includes many invariable things, right, many facts, in the sense that I can, name as nouns the objects that are engaged in this situation. I can describe the state of affairs objectively. But this situation is a live situation, right? Meaning that uh, it is in the process of unfolding. It is still developing. What it is not yet fixed. It is variable. And I have the ability to enter into the situation to change that situation. But I can only change what is variable in that situation. I can only change my own action within that situation. So, what is variable? Well, obviously, many things are variable. And anything that I can change through action is variable. And so, the color of the wall, the height of the table, these are variable things that I can change through action. But what I think is more important, the kind of variable nature of things that Aristotle has in mind, would be simply the variability of my own action, right? That I can decide what to do. And that through my action, I can then change other people's actions and even change other people's habits and change the world, which is, we could think of the world as the sum of people's habits with respect to invariable laws of nature. So we said this before, but I'll repeat it. For Aristotle, I simply can't have the kind of knowledge about what I should do in the situation that I have about a mathematical equation. It is categorically impossible to have that kind of knowledge about action, or what I should do, about what the right thing to do is in this situation. That's why, right, it's developed through habit. It's a kind of instinct. It's this practical wisdom. But here's what I think is the important takeaway from that. And this is one of the major points of book 6 when he's discussing Aristotle and Plato. He says, because of the nature of practical wisdom, because I can never have the kind of knowledge about what I should do that I have about uh, invariable things. Practical wisdom, knowledge about the good, is always going to be more like opinion than knowledge. And we know from Plato that opinion is debatable. Everyone has their opinion, and opinion is inherently suspect. Right? But this is precisely what Aristotle is getting at. Knowledge about invariable things is invariable because it can be demonstrated. If there's any doubt that 2 plus 2 equals 4, I can get 4 things together, make 2 groups of 2, and add them together and demonstrate that 2 plus 2 is 4. Right? This is like what we saw in the Euthyphro. That is the sort of standard of knowledge. Plato is searching, or maybe searching for, a kind of knowledge about the good that would be equivalent to this degree of certainty, or would have this degree of certainty. Aristotle says that's just not possible. There are certain kinds of knowledge that just can't be demonstrated. And because they can't be demonstrated, they're always going to appear to be the same as opinion. They will operate like opinion. What's really important is that the fact that practical knowledge looks like opinion doesn't make it any less true or right or real as knowledge. Doesn't make it any less knowledge. The trouble with ethics, trouble with practical wisdom, is that knowledge about the good can't be distinguished from opinion about the good because it can't be demonstrated. Right? It can't be demonstrated because it's about the future, right? Which doesn't yet exist. But, right, this doesn't mean that it's not real, that it isn't true knowledge. And, this takes us back again also to this question of how do we then recognize virtue from its opposite? How do we recognize this knowledge about the right thing to do from opinion about the right thing to do? Right? And this gets into all sorts of difficult territory, right? The example that comes to mind, maybe this is not a great example, but I'm thinking about the example that comes to mind is the example of vaccines, right? The scientific wisdom, which is based on knowledge about invariables, is still a kind of ethical prescription, right? You should get vaccinated. The vaccine will be good. But because I can't demonstrate that the vaccine will not in the future cause some problem for you, you have to take it to some extent on faith that this doctor knows what the right thing to do is in the situation. However, because it can't be demonstrated that a vaccine will not give a child autism, and perhaps there are even demonstrable cases of vaccines. Well, no, I'm not going to say that, right? Yeah. I better clarify. The development of autism in children has not been shown to have any kind of scientific link to autism. However, if your child develops autism around the same time that it gets vaccinated, you might see that as a demonstration that vaccination has caused autism, right? However, this is a classic logical fallacy, right? Correlation does not equal causation. It cannot be demonstrated that vaccination will not cause autism because it's about something in the future. And it hasn't been demonstrated that vaccination does cause autism. However, because it can't be demonstrated, the advice to get vaccinated will always seem to be opinion. And if I believe that there is a link, if it's my opinion that there's a link between vaccination and autism, based on this, fallacy that correlation is the same as causation, and autism developing parallel to vaccination is actually developing as a result of vaccination. If I, use that faulty reasoning and develop the opinion that autism is caused by vaccination, then it can seem that I have a doctor's opinion and someone else's opinion. And the doctor can't demonstrate in advance that their opinion is better than the other opinion. Can't be demonstrated. So how do we decide which opinion to use, to take, right? That brings us back again to the question of how we recognize virtue. We say, well, the doctor is virtuous. The doctor is excellent, right? The doctor's been through med school. The doctor has a job at a good hospital. The doctor, has taken a Hippocratic oath. The doctor, whatever, has all these good virtues. I like them as a person, whatever it might be. They have the, certification of the American Medical Association or whatever. You have to evaluate the opinion about what you should do based on the person giving the opinion. So, I judge that the doctor probably has, the doctor's opinion is based in more knowledge about the reality, knowledge about the invariables, but it's also based in more experience in medicine, and therefore they have more practical wisdom, and their opinion is more like knowledge than the opinion of someone who is not a doctor, has no experience in the medical field, doesn't know as many of the invariables, have as much certain knowledge, etc. Right? I have to judge which opinion is more reliable, safer to trust, based on my judgment of the person, whether or not they're virtuous, whether or not they're excellent. And this is a major problem, right? Because the fact that practical wisdom can't be demonstrated the way that scientific or mathematical knowledge can be, means that the only way to be guided by the best opinion is to be able to recognize virtuous people. And if there's disagreement about what a virtuous person is, then the whole idea of following practical wisdom and the whole idea that there is such a thing as practical wisdom gets kind of destroyed, right? So we see this now all the time, right? I mean, vaccination is one example, but I mean, that's what happened. That's what's happening with COVID also. The doctors say wear masks, but I don't really think so. I don't think it makes sense. It doesn't feel right to me. Right? Okay, that feeling is your practical wisdom kicking in. However, your feeling about this is not going to be as honed, as accurate, as good, as reliable, or trustworthy as the feeling that a doctor has. Right? They're both just feelings for the most part. This will work. This is the right thing to do. I can't demonstrate that this will work. I can only say that in my best judgment, it will. So why don't we go with that judgment? Why would someone not trust the doctor? It would be that they don't think they're a virtuous person, right? That they don't believe that the people that are saying these things actually either believe what they're saying or that they're saying them for some sort of ulterior motive. And that is, I think, a major issue. And I think what's interesting, I mean, this is sort of the first time I've thought about this. I mean, the extent to which Aristotle's theory of ethics really explains sort of the collapse of truth, right? That, anyway, we can understand the collapse of institutions, the collapse of trust in the news media, the collapse of trust in medical establishment, trust in institutions across the board, Congress, universities, what have you. We can understand the collapse of trust in institutions in this way, right? That we no longer recognize the people in those institutions as virtuous, and therefore no longer listen to their advice about what the best thing to do is. In any case, so this fact about the nature of practical wisdom, that it looks like opinion, means also, again, that there is this inherently political dimension to having practical wisdom. Because, as Aristotle says in Book 6, because practical wisdom looks like opinion, it requires that the phronimos, the person with practical wisdom, be good at persuasion. Practical wisdom requires persuasion. It requires that people be persuaded and that the practically wise person is able to persuade people. And this ties in nicely to returning to our original point, ties in nicely to um, the idea of continence and incontinence, and where incontinence comes from. Uh, how it can be that someone knows what the right thing to do is, but fails to do it. And Aristotle speculates that perhaps one reason for this is that the incontinent person, although they know what the right thing to do is, they aren't genuinely persuaded by it. Right? In the sense that, um, well, for example, right, you might want to uh, quit smoking. I don't even know if people smoke anymore, but useful example. You want to quit smoking. Uh, you know it's the right thing to do, but every time you try and quit, you come back to it, right? You fall back into it. Now, it's a little bit problematic, right? Addiction, chemical addiction makes it more complicated, but, you know, let's go with it. And why do you keep coming back to it? It might have to do with your uh, your reasons. Right? Why do you think it's the right thing to do? Right? You know that it's going to give you cancer. Abstractly, you have this knowledge, and this knowledge compels you to believe that you should quit. The right thing to do is to quit. But this knowledge, this abstract knowledge that at some point smoking might give you cancer, is right abstract. It's something down the line. It's not that persuasive, perhaps. Right? Maybe you aren't that strongly persuaded by it, and so the you go back to smoking. Right? The drive to smoke, the desire to smoke, is stronger than the force of persuasion in the argument that one day you might get cancer. But then let's say maybe a year or two later, you've been smoking consistently, and you start to feel it in your lungs. Right, you're no longer able to walk upstairs without without losing your breath. Suddenly, you have a much more immediate and persuasive reason to quit smoking. Quitting smoking, the reason to not smoke is that I am presently unhappy. Smoking is making me unhappy. I can't walk upstairs. I can't do basic things. So I think it's an interesting idea that the difference between what prevents an incontinent person from following through is that they don't have a persuasive enough reason. They don't have a persuasive enough arguments, right? So this again goes back, I think, to the fact that motivation is so important for Aristotle, right? That if you have the right motivation, then you are ethical, right? You're doing things for the right reasons, then the action is ethical. And that would maybe be connected to this, right? That a huge part of becoming ethical is having a persuasive reason to be ethical, persuasive motivation. And that persuasive motivation is what separates the continent from the incontinent person. So persuasion. Yeah, so I guess the last thing to say on that front would be sorry, I can't bring this thought up. Then the difference between the incontinent and the continent would be slightly different, right? That why do some people find it easier to change their habits than others? It would perhaps be that the continent find the simple desire to be virtuous more persuasive than others. Right? That one of the marks of the incontinent is that they just aren't that persuaded by virtue in itself. That might be one way to think about it anyway. All right, so I want to just say one last thing about book 7, and then we'll call it a day, which is that Aristotle in book 7 gives us a little bit of a kind of hierarchy of the unvirtuous. And he says that there are two kinds of people. There are three kinds of unvirtuous people. There are the brutish, the soft, and the incontinent. Right? And I think what he says the two of these are not as bad as the third, right? The incontinent and the soft are more forgivable than the brutish, right? The brutish are those who are wicked, sort of are intentionally wicked. The incontinent and the soft are those who merely can't bring themselves to be virtuous, who, if they do something bad or wicked or unvirtuous, they do it by accident. They don't do it with intention. And so we know about the incontinent. By the soft, I think Aristotle means those who recoil from action in general, right? Who prefer to stay out of things. And I just want to say, well, no, I'll skip it. So the soft and the incontinent. Well, Aristotle talks about the soft as effeminate, and we certainly see Aristotle's misogyny and the patriarchy of Greek culture coming out there, right? That women are inherently softer and therefore less inclined to virtue. We should be very critical of that, and we'll come to that in a couple of weeks. We'll come to the point of picking apart Aristotle's theory in a couple of weeks. But softness also means something else. It means the inability to endure, right? And so let's think of softness simply as that. Right? Forget all that talk about sort of unwillingness to kill, right? Even when killing is the right thing to do, right? Unwillingness to lie, right? I think the most obvious example is, right, for Aristotle, there are certain circumstances in which the right, moderate, correct thing to do is kill your enemy, and softness would be the inability to do that even when it's right. Something more than cowardice, because it would affect other virtues also. I think that here's what I think. It's unfortunate that softness is identified with women for two reasons. First of all, it's unfair to women. Obviously, endurance is a quality that's just as available in women as in men. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who just died, is an example. Whatever you make of her politics, of a woman that has enormous endurance and grit and ability to withstand hardship and work. Um, but the other reason why it's unfortunate that softness is identified with women is that then in the sort of reevaluation of classical ethics, not only are women put on the same level as men, which in my opinion is quite right, but then also those attributes which were deemed to be feminine by classical philosophy are also sometimes raised to be just as valuable as other qualities. And this is what I want to push back on a little bit. That I'm thinking of this tote bag that I saw, which said softness, radical softness as resistance. And it just made me think of Aristotle and what softness means, right? The inability to endure, the inability to put up with anything. And right, the idea that softness would be a virtue. Now, what we don't mean by softness is something like ability to express emotions or vulnerability. Because indeed, sometimes being able to be vulnerable is a strength, right? But right, the basic idea that you want to be strong is really essential to Aristotelian ethics, and I don't think that is necessarily a problem. Being strong is good. You can be strong in your whatever values you have, even if those values are, I judge that one should, always cry at rom-coms. I don't know, whatever. But you can be strong even in your defense of what appears to be a quote unquote soft value or virtue, right? So anyway, that was a weird tangent. The more important point is that softness and incontinence can both be forgiven, right? That when someone does something wrong, sort of by accident or without intention, their motive is important. They didn't mean to, right? They did the thing, but they didn't mean to. And that is should be taken into account when we're judging them, right? By contrast, someone who's brutish, someone who is wicked, does the bad thing intentionally and desires to do the bad thing. So obviously we judge that person more harshly than we judge the incontinent one. And this is still something that we absolutely have in both our legal system and in our culture, right? That intention matters, and people do bad things for different reasons and in different ways. The way that the bad thing is done and the motivation is important, right, in our evaluation. So I wanted to say one last thing to return to this idea about the collapse of trust in institutions, why people no longer trust doctors, how it could be that we would lose faith in the virtuous. And one thing Aristotle does in book 7 here is set up a kind of dichotomy and opposition between the phronimos, the person with practical wisdom, the virtuous person, and the wicked, right? And the wicked is going to present their opinion as being as good as the virtuous person's opinion, but it will be the opposite, right? So I think it's right to murder, or to be gluttonous, to be lazy, to uh, be a liar or cowardly or whatever, right? Whatever vice they're promoting. They will present themselves as knowing what is right. So the average person who is trying to improve themselves, to find excellent habits, will have a difficult time distinguishing between the virtuous person and the wicked person, both of whom will sort of unabashedly say that they know what is right, and both of whom can only use persuasion. So, you know, sort of spread of evil is when the wicked person is more persuasive than the virtuous person. Uh, and this is the sort of great peril of ethics and of politics in particular, right? That the virtuous and the wicked both use the same tools to try and convince us about what we should do. And when the wicked are more persuasive than the virtuous, right, everyone can be persuaded that evil is actually virtue. And this is why it's so important to begin practicing virtuous habits and to do it your whole life. All right, so we'll end it there. Good stuff. See you on Wednesday.